Hello, hello. We are now live. So, how's it going, guys? My name is Hiram.
And my name
With Go ahead.
is Carissa Des.
And we are here with Based, which is a podcast that aims to hopefully just answer some questions about different social, political topics, normal everyday life topics, and from a very unique perspective because we got two people from two of the weirdest cities in the United States. Me in Austin, and Carissa in Portland.
From
I was
Portland.
just gonna let you say Portland,
Oh,
but
from Portland, Oregon.
yes. So we have a guest today, Dan. I'll let him introduce himself to you guys, and maybe even if you feel comfortable, Dan, introducing the topic to our audience.
Uh, sh- sure. I'm Dan. I also live in Portland, Oregon, and I have been chatting with Carissa for the last couple of days about polyamory and the kind of the whole topic of ethical non-monogamy and how that works and whatnot.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan.
So the thing about
Go ahead.
Portland is that most people I meet here are in polyamorous relationships or are in open relationships. And when I first moved here, I went to a club and there was actually someone trying to get me to become polyamorous, and I was married at the time, and I was like, yeah, there's no way I would ever do that, and it was very new to me. So I kept asking questions and learned a little bit about it, but there's still a lot that I don't know or that I probably haven't even thought about before. But yeah, I feel like it's more common than not here, but it could just be a bias because my friends are in polyamorous relationships. But do you? I mean, I also think that most Portlanders smoke weed too, but it could just be the people that I'm around. But what do you think? Do you think that like the majority of people you meet are like polyamorous or in open relationships?
I don't know if it's the majority of people that I meet, but when I had just I think that I was kind of born polyamorous. It's something that came very natural to me, but I never knew that it was actually a thing for a really long time. And I was living in Tennessee, North Carolina at the time, and was planning to move up here, and was just kind of discovering that you could be in relationships like this, and that people were interested in it, and there had been a few books written about it. Mm-hmm. And my best friend, who was trying to talk me into moving to Portland, used the polyamory scene as a way to convince me that this was the place for me. So it definitely is a big enough thing that lots of people know about it. It's one of the few places I've been where it doesn't, when you tell people that you're not monogamous, they don't look at you like you're crazy most of the time.
Yeah, definitely. People look at me like I'm crazy because I'm monogamous. Or maybe it's just my hair. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's really interesting, like all the different aspects of these relationships. I actually thought that I was polyamorous, and maybe I am a little bit because I can I can have feelings for multiple people. But when it comes to the actual relationship, I don't think that I could do it. And one of the biggest factors is jealousy, and another is just maybe I'll evolve and get past that, but also just like having multiple sex partners, I feel like can be unsafe. But I know that there are ways, if you're communicating, to do it right.
Yeah, I think that jealousy is a big issue in polyamorous relationships. Even people who feel like polyamorous relationships are the only ones they're willing to be in. They still deal with jealousy. And I think that jealousy is one of those things that it gives you some insight into your relationship. I find that jealousy is usually a fear-based thing, and it gives you an opportunity to communicate, what's happening, why you're feeling afraid, what it is that you're needing from your partner to help you kind of overcome that jealousy and keep building trust, and to make sure that the relationships that you're in feel safe to you. And I think that with just like any other, sexual identity, polyamorous needs fit on a spectrum where some people, like myself, I have always felt like, monogamous relationships I didn't function very well in monogamous relationships, whereas other people kind of choose to be in non-monogamous relationships, but they're perfectly comfortable in a monogamous relationship also. And then there's people all the way to the monogamous spectrum that don't feel like they could ever fit into a non-monogamous relationship and would never entertain the idea at all.
Yeah. So you're married, right? And you're
Yes.
In an open relationship. Do you still consider that poly, or because I know that people can be poly, like two people can get together and then have a closed relationship. Would you consider the actual relationship poly, or are you just two poly people in an open relationship?
So there's the terms around this change all the time, and all sorts of people have different ideas of, what the proper term that they feel comfortable with. And so I'm married. I've been in a relationship with my wife for 5 years, a little more than 5 years now, and we have been non-monogamous throughout that entire time. Although we spent a big chunk of the beginning of our relationship really focused just on each other. We realized that our relationship was something special to both of us. And we wanted to kind of, as we started moving toward that sort of nesting idea where we were moving in together and really, sharing our entire lives, we spent quite a long time where we weren't dating other people. And so we are in an open relationship. I date outside of our relationship more often than my wife does at this point. And she's actually pretty comfortable being in a monogamous relationship or a non-monogamous relationship as long as that relationship is completely honest. So that's kind of where we are currently. So
yeah,
that is I'd say a very rare perspective in the culture I come from. Like a rare occurrence. I feel like culturally, there are a lot of different values that sometimes conflict with polyamory in different parts of the world and different cultures. And this applies to religious beliefs too. But I just, find it interesting that both you and Dan find it somewhat common. And Dan, that it's been something that, you've been living through now for many years, because at least 5 years ago, I felt like that was much more taboo than it is, today. And I feel like that part of it is that like culture's kind of merging because of technology and everything. There's ideas that are being more widely accepted now than before, but yeah, that's more kind of like an assumption, less something that I know factually. But definitely for me, that's what it feels like. I feel like I've learned so much about these unique, and it's great to have somebody that has that much experience, because personally, I feel like it's a new concept, but it's really not, you know what I mean? Not at all. And that's mostly because I come from a really particular cultural lens.
Yeah, I think, there have been books being written on it since, as far back as the late 60s that I know of. So it's been around for a long time. And I imagine it's been around as long as people have been forming relationships with each other. So,
yeah.
But when I first realized that I didn't function in monogamous relationships, that I had no idea that it was a thing that you could do. There were two terms for me where I grew up. One was a slut, and the other was a dirty, rotten cheater. And
it's worse
and
if
neither one of them were.
Too.
What's that?
It's worse if you're a femme too, and that's like your lifestyle.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and
if you're
so
a guy, you're a player, but if you're a femme, you're a slut. So I think it's even harder. But anyway,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
Yeah, it's so it was something that for me, I kept really quiet and never really understood why it was different for me. But from my very first relationship, it didn't function. I didn't function within monogamy well, but I also didn't want to be dishonest in my relationships. And so there was this challenge of finding myself attracted to someone new, moving out of one relationship and immediately into another, and just kind of bouncing through relationships until finally I decided for a long time I just wasn't going to do relationships that were, any sort of committed dating relationship, which comes with its whole own set of, trust issues. And then I realized you can just decide to live a life this way. And it's, I think that I started finding out about polyamory maybe 12 years ago, came out to my friends and family maybe 10 years ago. So, and have,
that was my
it's just the way of.
And what, Dan, do you think was your first big obstacle in becoming, more accustomed to being polyamorous versus holding monogamous relationships? Because I'm sure you've had many challenges, but what was maybe your first big one?
Yeah, I mean, I think my first big challenge was before I'd ever heard the word polyamory. Just realizing that I wasn't the same as other people. My very first relationship, I was in maybe 9th grade, and the girl that I was dating, was my very first girlfriend. I was super excited about it, and she broke up with me. I found out, the day after that she and my best friend had been, getting together and deciding to date for a week or two prior to her breaking up to me. And everybody told me that that should be the end of it. I should not be, I should never speak to either one of them again. And I just didn't understand, why that was a thing. I enjoyed being around both of them. I didn't understand why we couldn't all just be friends, why that meant that, some trust had been broken simply because they enjoyed each other's company. And I really just wanted everybody to be able to talk about it, and everybody thought I was crazy. And so that was a big obstacle, just not functioning in the same mind space as most people in relationships. When I really started coming out as being polyamorous, I kind of thought, and I think a lot of people do, that it would open the field of people that I had to date. And I found that was not the case, that it actually narrowed the field of people that were available for me to date, especially when meeting people in real life. And without knowing where all the poly people hang out, it's hard to meet poly people. So, so yeah, that can be a change. That was a challenge in the very beginning.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I have a question. In my understanding, poly was that you can love multiple people, you can have multiple partners, but some people believe that it's not a poly relationship if you don't have good communication, where you're not betraying each other and going behind each other's back to to have these other relationships. It's poly if you're communicating that you have this other partner. And it's more like you're managing all these different relationships while your other partners have knowledge of them. Is that true to you, or?
Yeah, I think different people. Really. What was that last part? I didn't hear it.
I think it depends on the person. I think that's.
Yeah, I think it depends a lot just on the individual relationship dynamics. I have a sort of a partner, if you could call it that, a friend that we are very close, and her main partner, the only thing that they really do is just say, hey, this is a person I'm hanging out with, there's a chance we're going to have sex. So, and that's as much talking as they really do about it, and that works for them. Other people have a lot more, they spend a lot more time talking about who they are dating. And I have another friend who is in a relationship with a married man. His wife is monogamous, and she dates him and spends a lot of time with both of them, but in order for her to start dating someone outside of that relationship, they have all kinds of conversations, like, 5, 6 long conversations before they ever even meet this person. And so, what was that?
That sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah, and it can be a lot of work, and so it just depends on what what you need in that relationship. But communication is definitely very important. I think I would say that that's not just a thing for poly relationships, but for all relationships. In order to have a strong, healthy relationship, communication is vital. In poly relationships, it really forces the matter. You just can't get around, the communication.
Yeah. My dream poly, like if I were to be poly, would be that I would have like 3 boyfriends and we just wouldn't like talk about what we were doing. I don't think that would actually work, as an adult, like.
Yeah. It does work for some people. I've met people who their thing is sort of a tacit approval for cheating. They have a don't ask, don't tell sort of relationship. But that's kind of skirts the lines of being ethical because you just don't,
unethical
those relationships don't work super well usually.
So yeah, and I think when it comes to like polyamory, one very big challenge is understanding the way that the dynamics of your relationship function, right? Because like you said, I think so long as there's communication within the relationship, you can easily overcome what I think many folks sometimes mistakenly believe in. That's like that if you love somebody else, you're trading that love for this other person. I think that every person has almost an unlimited capacity to, give love to others, maybe limited by time, right? But when it comes to the actual ability to love and to give, there's no trade-off, right? You don't love somebody less to love somebody more, or the other way around. But that seems to be a very like innate like challenge to like try to accept that as like maybe reality for the relationship you're in. And I think part of being able to accept that, like you said, is communication. I don't know too much about polyamory, but that's kind of how I deal with my jealousy, right? If I'm ever jealous in a relationship and I haven't been in a polyamory one, I just think that I remind myself that there's no trade-off, in that kind of situation. Jealousy is kind of really rooted in insecurity and mostly in a fear that you're going to lose what you have. But in a lot of cases, you're not losing what you have, and it's kind of, it's difficult, but I've spent a lot of time thinking about how I would overcome some of these challenges you talk about and what kind of communication I think would be most effective in my relationship.
Yeah, I think that I think that jealousy is almost always based in fear. And a lot of it is the fear of, losing someone that's super close to you, super special to you. And it's scary when you see your partner meet somebody new and they're in the throes of that new relationship energy, they call it, NRE.
Yeah,
and they're like so excited to be with somebody brand new. They're falling in love and you're watching that happen. It's easy to think, well, wait a minute, what if they start to love that person more than me? What if they want to start living with this other person and they don't want to live with me anymore? And you can just like spiral into this hole of, self-pity and jealousy, and it can create serious problems if you're not communicating. Although some people feel the opposite of that, which is called compersion. Compersion is like a feeling of joy in place of jealousy. So when you see your partner falling in love, you feel this excitement about it. Luckily for me, I tend to feel compersion much more powerfully than I feel jealousy. And when I do feel jealousy, I always know that I need to first do some self-reflection to figure out what it is I'm afraid of, and then immediately open that conversation with my partner. And it doesn't take long before we're kind of getting back to, our comfort and our trust with each other, even if, my partner's super excited about spending the night at somebody else's house.
So that leads me to the question of protection. Like, do you ever? I'm sure you both are safe, or wear condoms or whatever. But is that a big worry? Like in poly relationships, like that they're going out, like sleeping with new people and all that. Is that like something that you communicate beforehand?
Yeah, absolutely. I've become very comfortable having sexual health conversations, and my partner, that's one of the things that we have made a really strong agreement about, is that before we engage in any sexual activity with anyone new, that we have built enough of a relationship with each other to trust their level of being honest about everything, but especially about their sexual health, and had some long conversations about sexual health, and just making sure that everyone who you're adding into your circle of sexual partners is on the same page as to sexual health. And that can be a challenging thing. There have been times when I was really excited to get involved with someone sexually, but they didn't quite fit the level of comfort that I needed, or the level of comfort that my wife needs. And I had to make that decision that I'm not going to start a sexual relationship with this person. And that can be a really challenging and disappointing conversation to have with someone. But honest, you just have to be able to be that honest with your partners. I think everyone needs to be able to be that honest with their partners.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So a lot of my friends. Oh, go ahead, Hiram.
No, go ahead, Chris.
I'm gonna kind of switch to a different.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm gonna pivot. You go ahead.
No, I'm completely fine moving on.
You. A lot of my friends are in polycules. Is that what you call it?
Yeah.
Where they're, it's like a group of like 3 or 4 people who are poly, and they're all like each other's partners. And I find that, I don't know, I feel like there's a lot of drama there, but I was wondering if you have ever been in a relationship like that before, where it was like you all shared, and is it called, at that point, are you swingers, or is that like an old term that's not really used anymore?
Yes. So swingers is a little bit different. Swingers tend to be all about the sex and less about the relationships. So when you think about the old, 70s key parties where everybody goes and drops their keys in a bowl, and, you pull out a set of keys and go home with the person whose keys you grabbed. And the idea there is to have essentially casual sex. And polyamory is a little more focused on the relationships by most people's definition. So not that there isn't a lot of, juicy sexuality in the poly world, but it's just not quite as impersonal as what swingers are typically used to. And so the other part of your question, I have been in relationships where I was in a tight-knit group, and we were all dating. So I dated a girl that I was living with for a while, and she was dating another guy. I eventually started dating his primary partner. So the 4 of us all spent a lot of time together. The most challenging thing about it, most of the time, was that when it was time to go to bed, we all had to have a conversation about who was going to whose bed. And, but that got to be pretty easy after a while. It can be challenging when like one person one of those 2 or 2 of those people break up, and then the rest of the group is all together. And that did happen in our group. And we had to communicate through that just as much as we had to communicate through when our relationship was really strong. It's part of it. There's communication becomes, very second nature, and you have to be vulnerable. You have to be honest. And you and you're able to work through almost anything.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen people who handle those relationships with massive amounts of drama, though. I think that there are some people who kind of thrive on the drama in some ways.
I would just be like a little drama bee if I was in a polycule. I'd be like,
yeah,
that's my bitch. Like,
go ahead, Hiram.
Yeah. Think there's something liberating about being polyamorous? Do you think it's more of personal preference, or because sometimes, and let me preface that, I feel like polyamory is like scolded or frowned upon because, you know, it evidently universally brings everybody feelings of jealousy, which they may not understand, you know, because jealousy, as I have it understood, is like a very natural instinct that has been observed in children as young as 6 months. So it's not like you develop jealousy. You're born with that biological trait, and understanding it and overcoming it, I think, takes a level of maybe enlightenment or self-awareness. And I don't know if you think because of that, journey that it takes to be polyamory, there's something not necessarily superior, but liberating versus being monogamous. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think for me personally, and I am one of the strange people who I really feel like non-monogamy is a deep-seated part of my sexual identity. And so for me, realizing that I could be open about it, that I could live in a place where people accept it, and I don't have to be so afraid of, somebody seeing me holding hands with somebody that's not my wife, and, losing my job over it, which when I was in Tennessee was a thing that happened sometimes.
They would fire you for cheating on your partner?
Yeah, if you got outed for cheating. Yeah, if you got outed for cheating, it was not uncommon to get fired from your job. It's just a very religious kind of place where that, for some reason, they feel like that is grounds for firing because it doesn't fit the family values of the workspace, is what they normally tell you.
It's like a personal decision. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's a strange place out in Tennessee, and it's a hard place to be polyamorous. I bet. It's a hard place to be gay. Or trans or anything other than, a white married person. Really, it's kind of what it boils down to.
Anything other than a white cis male.
Yeah, really. That helps a lot out there.
And it's crazy because that reflects in how we pick our presidents. Just fun fact: always a nuclear family for the U.S. president. Anything that deviates away from that polyamorous president, not going to happen.
Yeah, totally. At least not anytime soon.
Anytime soon, yeah, of course.
Yeah. And I think that you see in the public sphere, we've seen, homosexuality. Well, I mean, I actually can think all the way back to, early in my life, I started seeing for the first time a man and wife on television sleeping in the same bed. For a long time, they just had two beds in a room, and because they couldn't show anything so lewd as a single bed in a bedroom on television. And then eventually that became commonplace. Eventually we started seeing, gay people on television on occasion. We started seeing trans people on television. And so you see these little things pop up in culture in really small entertainment sort of ways. And then they start to broaden out to where, now, gay marriage has been legalized. And so that movement often starts in pop culture, and we are starting to see polyamory pop up into pop culture right now. Mm-hmm. So we're kind of in the early days of people seeing that it is a thing that is possible.
It'll be the next thing vilified.
And so my wife just said, and it'll be the next thing that's vilified. Mm-hmm. So when enough of our culture has gotten comfortable with trans rights, which right now are a big challenge in our country, and so polyamory might come along after that at some point, and it will be vilified, and they'll try to make laws against it,
policy
and
changes,
and then eventually our whole culture will settle into realizing that this is a perfectly valuable and appropriate way to conduct your relationships.
Could you imagine if there was a law against polyamory, like in Portland? Like, you'll get fined if you have two boyfriends. Like that, I don't think that would ever happen.
Yeah, I mean, I doubt it's going to happen in Oregon, but I could totally see it happening in
Texas?
Yeah, totally. In Tennessee, Georgia, I could see it happening in those places.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's just hard to imagine because we do live in Portland and like pretty much anything goes here, which is one of the things I love about it. Like,
yeah,
just, like, let your freak flag fly and like do whatever you want and
Yeah.
not really get a whole lot of judgment unless you go to like, the Pearl District or something. It's a little bit more conservative there, but
yeah.
what about in Texas, in Austin? Well, I know, Austin's a lot different than the rest of Texas, but is there a lot of stigma around polyamory in Austin?
I think no more than you would expect in a city with thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. It feels to me like there's maybe in Austin in particular, being such a metropolitan area, there's more folks than in other conservative areas of Texas that are willing to be in polyamorous relationships. And in terms of like the public sphere, I think it's generally accepting. Austin is very progressive. It's a city where a lot of people with different identities and goals and feelings, come. And so because there's a lot of that diversity coming in, there's been a bigger amount of tolerance in the city than in other parts of Texas. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know. I don't think it's one of those things that's as heavily stigmatized as it is in smaller Texas towns.
Yeah, definitely. I want to touch a little bit more on coming out and like how the community, do they, how they treat you differently and like what your family thinks about your relationships. Because I feel like if I told my mom that I was like polyamory, she wouldn't blink an eye. She'd be like, oh, cool. All right. And then my other side of the family is a little bit more judgmental, but I probably just wouldn't tell them. Is your family pretty open to your lifestyle?
Yeah, my mom had a lot of questions about what it meant, and she thought it was, a little odd, but she was just like, okay, I guess it makes sense after she had asked all of her questions, and it took her weeks of asking me. She would just think of something new that she was worried about and ask me how it worked, and sometimes regret how honest I am when I answered the question. But as I think when I told my sister, she was like, of course you are. That makes total sense. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that was a thing, but now that I know it's a thing, it's obviously your thing. And so a lot of people who knew me really well were just like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. And so I was surprised at how many of my family and friends were completely accepting of it. But I also was surprised that there were a handful of people who were just like, that's a little too deviant for me, and stepped out of my life. And which seems like a weird thing to, walk away from a friendship over. But I had a few friends, female friends especially, who felt like me telling them that I was polyamorous meant that my only goal was to sleep with everyone, and they were just like, yeah, I don't want you coming on to me all the time, so I don't want to be around you anymore.
It's kind of like when you come out as like bi, your girlfriends are like, whoa, are you hitting on me? Yeah, I totally get it.
Totally, absolutely.
So folks, we're I think hitting the 45-minute mark in just
we have as much time as we need on Zoom, but But we did want to stop at around 9, so we have like 5, maybe 10 minutes.
Yeah, and on that note, I wanted to ask. I think it's really important for folks that are interested in maybe starting a journey as a polyamorous individual. What are some of the tips and tricks that, as a veteran, that you have for folks who
Start
are
your
just
journey, I
exploring
like
the
that.
side of themselves?
Yeah,
Poly
I
journey.
would say starting with some reading is a really good idea. I think that there's the two books that I read early on in my journey. One was called The Ethical Slut,
Oh yeah.
which is
That one.
written by I actually have it up over here, Janet Hardy, I think, and there was another author on it too. And then More Than Two is a really good book written by Franklin Vo and Eve Rickert, and just like reading a little bit and understanding what sorts of relationships are out there, what it's really all about. It kind of helps to dispel the excitement of, I'm going to be poly so I can have threesomes all the time, and that's all you really care about, and kind of helps you to understand what it really means, what kind of communication is necessary, the sort of pitfalls that you can fall into. For example, a lot of couples, especially when they decide to open their relationship for the first time, decide to make all these rules for each other, and that almost always include rules like, okay, we can sleep with people, but we can't fall in love. And you can't tell yourself not to fall in love. Just happens. And you never know where a relationship is going to end when it first starts. And you just kind of have to allow yourself to be open and honest with each other enough to let your relationships play themselves out. And without putting a bunch of rules on each other. And that tends to cause relationships to implode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that kind of reminds me of I wasn't sure if I was going to talk about this. I told Hiram, but I decided that I wanted to try the poly lifestyle. So I was like in an open relationship with somebody, and then I fell in love immediately. So I was like, this is probably, and then I was like jealous, and it's like, okay, this isn't for me. But I'm definitely like, I'm not non-judgmental toward people who are in poly relationships. I think it's really, it comes down to what you're comfortable with, what your partners are comfortable with, like you said. And I think different relationships, you should allow them to like transform into what they're going to become, and not force these certain types of relationships on other people and yourself.
Yeah, there's an incredibly deep level of consent that you have to be comfortable with. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people in our culture who are, not that comfortable with consent at all. Or they're comfortable with, consent to, like checking in with their partner, but having this level of consent where your partner's telling you they want to sleep with someone else and they're checking in to see what your feelings around it are, is this whole new consent conversation that most people are not comfortable enough to have right off the bat. It takes some work and some time and some patience and some rocky times sometimes to deal with that, especially if you're in a partnership and opening it up for the first time, as opposed to kind of being on your own and deciding that you're just going to date multiple people and kind of starting off your poly world in, while you're single.
Do you, Dan, that's some really great advice, and I really, appreciate your insight. It really resonates with me, and it aligns a lot with, the information I've read. You mentioned compersion. There's a really great NPR podcast about it, actually, that came out like a month or two ago. I think you can just look it up online on Google, but that level of trust, that level of consent. I mean, some of the things that I think, pop culture makes you want to believe is that like polyamory leads to, unethical relationship having, and that's not true. Successful polyamory is just as healthy as successful monogamy. A lot of the themes are the same: trust, communication, consent. All of that is just basic human rights. It's not even like a, you know what I mean, basic human needs. It's not even like a, like a polyamory monogamous thing. I think everyone everywhere always wants good communication, fairness, love, and to be treated as a human. So
Absolutely. Yeah. And those are the things
Not
that make
me.
every relationship great. When I look at my grandparents were married for, I don't know, 50 something years before my grandmother died. And the thing that made their relationship great was when anything that came up that was a challenge, they would sit down and talk it out. They didn't always see eye to eye. They didn't always get along. I'm not sure they always even liked each other, but they were able to communicate through everything. And because their communication was so strong, they kind of remained a really good team throughout their whole lives. And all relationships thrive on solid, healthy communication and honesty.
Definitely.
yeah, no, thank you so much. And Carissa, I think we're about just at 5 minutes at 9:00. Dan,
We did it.
I
We
don't
didn't go
think
over
this
this
is-
time. Usually we end up going for like 2 hours. So we didn't
Yeah.
this time.
But Dan, if you have any last things you'd like to talk about, anything important that was left out, I think this is a really good, time for us to segue into anything me and Carissa might have missed, because
Any
we
last
just don't
words?
have the experience you do. Or any last words, essentially.
I don't know. I don't know what else I have. I think that if you're interested in, in open relationships and non-monogamous relationships, I think that it is worth having that conversation, whether it's with your partner or just doing some reading to decide if this is a lifestyle that's for you, and don't shy away from it simply because it seems scary and our culture tells us that all relationships should be one man and one woman. That's we know that that's bogus, and it's not just bogus because of the gender roles, but also because of the numbers. All relationships can be healthy if you make them healthy relationships.
I just want to say one last thing, it was just something that I thought about just now, but I don't want people to confuse polygamy and polyamory. Polyamory is a choice, and I think polygamy sometimes for the women who are sometimes women are forced to marry men. It's completely different for those listening who are like new to this topic. There's some similarities there where you have multiple partners, but polyamory, I think, is always a choice between the partners.
But polygamy has a history of this like deep-seated patriarchy. And it's in some ways the grossest end of what patriarchy can become. And polyamory certainly focuses a lot more on open, equal collaboration between partners, and anything that gets too mixed up in the patriarchy gets gross real quick.
Down with the patriarchy.
Well, thank you, Dan. Really appreciate all the information you've shared. And honestly, going into this patriarchy conversation and maybe its ties to,
That's our next
polyamory,
That's our next
monogamy and some other, I think you could talk about this from an evolutionary perspective, from a strictly, like a social political perspective. So part 2, maybe.
Yeah, we do
Right,
have,
soon.
we do have a second
I
guest
really
that
appreciate
wants to
all
talk
of your
about
comments. It's something that, I feel I'm going to apply to my life from here on out. All this information, I think, is going to make me just that much more prepared to face these difficult emotional situations that everybody is subject to, right? So again, thank you so much for coming on here with us.
Yeah, it was
and,
nice
and,
to
and sharing that information.
talk to you kind of in person. Talk to you live anyway.
Yeah, me too. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's nice talking to you. Yeah, and if you want to talk more, you let me know. I can figure out the time that could work.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
And thank you everybody for watching and listening. We will have an edited version of this on Spotify and anywhere you get your podcasts. This will be will remain on Twitch. This live podcast unedited and on Facebook, YouTube, all the spots. So thank you once again. This is Based with Des and Hiram. Our guest Dan Bowman. Thank you so much for talking with us about polyamory. And I hope you learned something. I definitely learned a lot today. So
great. Have a great day, Dan.
Night.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
y'all.
much. Likewise, all you guys have a beautiful day.
Have a good one.